This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. Welcome to our program, former Representative Carolyn Justice from Pender County.
Thank you for having me.
John Hood from the John Locke Foundation. Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former Attorney General, former Secretary of State, former candidate for governor, present Rufus Edmisten. Welcome to this edition of NC Spin. On this show, we've got some interesting topics we want to ask our panelists to react to, including the latest Elon University poll and what it means, tax law changes being considered, and reactions to whether our state should charge for public record requests. Let's get started. Just before Thanksgiving, the Elon University poll measured the temperature of registered voters in our state and found out they ain't very happy. More than half those surveyed thought Obamacare would make things worse in this state. They aren't happy with either Governor McCrory or our legislature either. Senator Kay Hagan dropped in her approval ratings, but the poll also showed few knew her Republican challengers. And it appears that support for voter ID has dropped, most especially among Democrats and African Americans. Rufus, you've run for office many times. What does this poll say to you, and what message should our elected officials take away from these findings?
Well, first of all, that I should never run again, to start with.
You needed a poll to tell you that?
Now, how can I start counting the ways that why people are really upset with the public? Let's start with how we do this silly thing called reapportionment. Until we find some way to have a neutral party control how the districts are shaped, people are going to be disgusted because they don't think they have a
All right,
part.
but if I'm an elected official, what's the message I should
The
get
message
from
is that you better start telling the truth, number one. You better not listen all the time to your consultants, because they are the ones that are causing the people to have disbelief in most candidates. You'd better get out there and do it campaigning the old-fashioned way and not beg for money day after day after day. And thirdly, you need to understand that people depend on you for their life, their liberty, and their happiness, and that when you get petty and you act ugly and nasty, you spoil it for everybody. And my remedy is to have people like Carolyn Justice, who I remember extremely well when she was in the legislature. She was decent, she was kind, she listened to people, and that is a rare commodity today.
Well, Carolyn, let me dovetail on what he's having to say. We've all seen these polls through the years when the voters say that they're not happy with elected officials and so forth like that. And then when comes time for election, they go in and reelect the incumbents. Is this particular poll showing some unusual angst, do you think, or is this just the normal disquiet?
Well, I think there's some unusual angst right now. I think everybody's just upset with government in general. You have to get a bank loan to buy a gallon of milk. You can't afford to send your kids to college. Gas goes up every time you go to the pump. Nothing's working right. Everything is wrong. And, of course, we're still in this recession. Everybody knows somebody that's lost a job. People are just sort of angry to begin with. And I saw a poll, an AP poll that said in 1972, 2/3 of people said they trusted their fellow man, and now only 1/3.
Yeah, the lack of trust.
The lack of trust.
In anything, really, not just politicians. John, there were a lot of people who felt like once the legislature adjourned and Governor McCrory sort of had Raleigh to himself, so to speak, that his approval ratings would go up. This poll shows that they're continuing to drop some. How do you explain that?
Might be differences in the methodology. Other polls have shown a small increase in approval for McCrory. McCrory and President Obama are in, as I've observed in the past, and actually the statistics are still that they are very close together in their lack of public approval. They're both in the 40% range. If you average the various polls together, they're in the high 30s to about 40%. I think this speaks somewhat to what Carolyn is talking about. There is a pervasive, not just distrust, but disappointment in both sides, to some extent, overpromising. President Bush overpromised some of his policies in the previous decade. President Obama's clearly overpromised his policies. People get very disaffected by that. They actually lack information about North Carolina politics to a greater degree than they do national politics, which gets a lot more attention. But I think this level of disapproval and distrust is widespread.
Well, let's further that line of thought. Why did Kay Hagan's approval ratings drop? She's particularly lost an awful lot of support among independents.
Well, I think part of this is, and everybody has addressed this, people are mad across the board, but let's don't forget there are people who do well when people don't like government. There are people who encourage people not to like government, to blame everybody else, to figure out a way to focus their anger, because the real story is the people still aren't recovered. Carolyn mentioned the economy, the tail end of the recession. People are, if they're not out of work, they're worried. They're still very fragile in their job. They don't make as much as they used to. They're worried about health care. They're worried about retirement. They're worried about sending their kids to college. They're trying to figure it out. They're frustrated and angry. Where do they turn? And everywhere they turn, people are saying, oh, it's the government's fault here. It's the government's fault over there. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. I mean, we're sort of in a culture now where we're trying to blame somebody because the rug has been pulled out from a lot of people.
Well, that part is true. Nobody wants to be accountable. I've got a two-part question I want to go around and ask everybody. Going back to the Hagan race, of course, there are a lot of people that say she is very vulnerable in her reelection. Number one, Carolyn, I'll start with you. Two questions. Number one, what must she do to retain the office? And number two, what must Republicans do in order to capture it?
To gain the office. Well, it's all going to depend on who turns out to the polls. If it's going to be a heavy conservative turnout, then she better get away from Obama. She better make that stand clear that she really wasn't for this affordable health care and that she's really for fixing it. I think she's going to have to distance herself. If this is a race where Democrats are going to turn out to the poll, then I guess she stands where she is. Republicans are going to have to. I agree with Rufus. We need to stop doing this beaten up thing. We need to say, here's what needs to be done, and here's how to fix it, and stick with your message and stop this destroying each other kind of campaign. I think that's what people are eager to hear.
John, how do you answer those two questions?
I think there are many factors that could influence the race, but if you want to boil it down, it's if Hagan wants to be reelected, she has to distance herself effectively from the disaster that is the health care bill.
Now, does that mean that she doesn't have Obama and Biden and Clinton and all these folks coming in here to campaign for her?
She would be unwise to be too closely associated with them. There are Democrats who are going to survive. If the election were held today, it would be a Republican wave election.
Right.
Now, it's not going to be held today, and we don't know what it's going to look like a year from now. But if that's the potential solution, there are Democrats that will survive that wave by separating themselves.
What do the Republicans got to do?
They have to connect her directly to Obama. But I agree with Carolyn. They also have to say, here's what you do instead, because I think people are frustrated with only naysaying and not solutions.
Chris, what's your answer?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we don't. John's right about we don't know what the perception will be of the Affordable Care Act. How many people will be signed up? The website's going to be fixed. The question is, what'll people think after that? The Republicans' big thing is Tom Tillis. If he's the nominee, the legislature's not very popular at the moment. He's going to have to defend everything the General Assembly did.
Rufus, quickly, what are your answers to those two questions?
She needs to keep up her good constituent work. That can get you defeated more than anything in the world. And then the Republicans have to understand that the blood sport normally belong to Democrats and not beat one another up.
Okay. You can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so view us anytime you like. And while there at ncspin.com, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle, so you can follow us at ncspin.com, NC Spin Spin Cycle, NC Spin on Facebook, and on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. We look forward to hearing from you. After these messages, we're going to talk about tax law changes.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Fishing isn't just part of my job, it's my life. It's a part of who I am and how I was raised in eastern North Carolina. It's how I put food on the table for my family. It's hard work, but I love what I do. There's something special about knowing that my long, hard days help feed friends, neighbors, and people in North Carolina. It might not be glamorous, but fishing is my life.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
The 2013 session of the General Assembly changed North Carolina tax laws, lowering both corporate and personal income tax rates. They repealed the estate tax and implemented new sales taxes. But the legislature's Tax Policy Oversight Committee is indicating they want to tweak that law they just passed. The Revenue Laws Study Committee is proposing to make sure admissions to all entertainment events are subject to sales taxes, including the state and local fairs, athletic events, plays, art exhibits, musical events, university dining hall purchases, and newspaper sales. The exception would be for admissions charged by secondary schools. Question one to Carolyn Justice. Why did Revenue Laws feel the need to tweak this reform that they just passed, and what do you think of their proposals?
Well, first of all, I think tweak is the wrong word. When the General Assembly was in session and they passed the new tax reform, they didn't have time to rewrite the definition of what's amusement and what all would be in that category. So they passed the bill and they said in the revenues laws in the off session here, you need to get together and write us a definition of all these things and what will and will not be taxed. So actually that's what they're doing, and they gave it to a subcommittee made up of, I believe it's Representative Carney, Moffitt, and Senator Russo, I believe. And they met and they came up with a proposal of what the definition and what things should be taxed, feeling that they believe that they didn't pick winners and losers. They made it fair across the board. That'll now have 30 days to steep. Everybody understand what it says, and then the revenues laws will vote on it and decide what they're going to do with it. And there actually is 3 exclusions. One is a secondary education, and if it's something that the school is putting on, there are some agricultural type events.
Rufus,
that'll be excluded.
Let me just ask the question: aren't people going to look at this as a tax increase?
Let me tell you, Tom, a tax is a tax. I don't care what you put on the pig's tail, petticoat, or whatever it is. A tax is a tax, and we're taking the low fruit approach here. I don't think we ever needed to lower the corporate tax here, because when in my years in public service, corporations just poured in here, report after report, we're the best state to come for this, best state to come for that. And I think that is sort of a cop-out to come around picking out tickets and people that, like me, that used to bust tables at Lenore Hall at Carolina. That is ridiculous to say you're going to charge somebody a meal at the university.
All right, John, in addition to these changes, there are a number of tax credits that are going to be expiring this month at the end of the year. And some of them are fairly prominent, one of which is the tax credit that we've been providing to movie and television producers in North Carolina to produce films here. This has been, supposedly, the film industry says this is one of the primary reasons why we have so many film productions going on. What do you think about letting that expire?
I think that perhaps Sleepy Hollow and other programs might have different historical properties in which to film, and I don't think for most taxpayers in North Carolina they care even a little bit about that. They resent being forced to subsidize an industry that is already subsidized in lots of other ways. Look, this entire discussion about the tax credits expiring and whether to expend the sales tax to all the like activities illustrates the entire hypocrisy of the tax reform debate for years. Remember all these really serious wonks who talked about how it's not that hard, we're going to expand the sales tax base and we're going to get... Yes, it is. That's why I never thought it was a good idea to mess around much with the sales tax base, why it was better to work with the income tax system and try to structure that one thing at a time. But people who are whining and complaining now are the very people that a year ago said, this legislature needs to get together and reform the tax code and apply the sales tax to all goods and services and get rid of all these credits. And then as soon as a popular thing, for example, the exemption for newspaper sales, comes up, suddenly the newspapers are very upset.
Yeah, my experience with newspapers is that they're all for free enterprise until it comes to their bailiwick. Chris, so what's going to happen here? The credit's going to expire. Is the legislature going to come back and make these changes?
Well, it's going to be interesting. Forget for a second, putting aside whether or not it's a good idea. John says the taxpayers don't care about the film tax credit. The taxpayers in the Wilmington area certainly care, or the people who represent them care. The Chamber of Commerce down there cares. The local politicians care. I was in Wilmington not too long ago. It is the only thing folks down there wanted to talk about. They're so panicked, whether it's right or not. Yeah. They're panicked, and
Mayor
it's going to have
Bill Saffo is all up in arms.
And it's not just.
About.
I mean, the Republicans. There are a lot of Republicans down there that feel the same way. So this is very a controversial issue. And actually, I think when people show up to a movie and they find out they have to pay a tax, or they buy a meal at Lenore Hall or whatever it is, this is an illustration of why this is very difficult and complicated. And Rufus is right. This is the low-hanging fruit. If we're going to tax services, we ought to be taxing professional services. But professional services have professional lobbyists, which is why this is so difficult.
Oh, no kidding. Well, now, Tom, here's another that ties in with that. These ridiculous credits that we give to bring industry in.
I was going to ask you about that.
Picking and choosing the ones, like as you say,
like
all
Hollywood.
Picking and choosing, and you're picking a certain industry and you're giving a great break to them. And I was on the film commission, and they do work, but at the same time, we dole out literally millions and millions of dollars to get people to come that were already going to come to this state. I can give you examples right now of people that.
But nothing's being said about changing that at all.
Not a bit. And both sides are just dumbfounded.
Well, that's one of those situations where everybody says, I can't stand it, but give me the medicine and I'll take it anyway.
I don't know.
They're all doing
it. I'm so sure that the film credit, like it's been, is going to
Well, I'm not talking about film credits. I'm talking about economic incentives in general. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about public records.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
We now return to NC Spin.
When Governor Pat McCrory appeared on our show several months ago, he said his office had received more than 200 requests for public records at that time, and that's just in the governor's office. State law requires that public records be made available to the media and citizens who request them, but often they require extensive time to retrieve, copy, and make available. According to McCrory's communications director, Kim Gennardo, a service charge is being assessed to any records requiring more than 30 minutes of employee time to process. Chris, you've been on both sides of this issue as a member of the news media as well as an employee of state government. What's your reaction to the government charging to process and make public records available?
Well, I'm very troubled by it. I mean, these are public records that are the public has a right to see, the media has a right to see, anybody has a right to see. They should be provided as free and as cheaply as possible. I think there probably are some extenuating circumstances on occasion, but you get into very dangerous territory here when you start charging people to have public information that should be readily accessible to people. I also want to comment on the governor's comments that he's sort of, in effect, being overwhelmed with public records requests. I can tell you the reporters at NC Policy Watch have a hard time getting records that shouldn't be searchable at all. You make a request for a simple memo that's already been available, that's public, for a copy of something, they refer you to a lawyer in the department instead of saying, here's a public record, we know it's right on our desk, we know you're entitled to it. They have, I think, a huge logjam, partially because of their own doing. I don't know whether it's paranoia or their unwillingness to share the records, but I can tell you, media all over the state are having the same experience. Part of this wound is self-inflicted.
All right, John. Okay, let's talk about it. Is this just a case where the media is overreacting because they're claiming that what's going on here is that the governor's trying to deny access to public records, and what I understood what he said was, okay, you can have the public records, but if they require extensive time from my staff, somebody ought to pay for that. And if a media makes the request, the media ought to be the ones that pay for it.
That is the argument he's making. It is unwise. It is legally questionable. Now, let's be clear about what the law does and does not require. Absolutely, for years, governments have routinely charged for copies of things, and there's rules about that. I think it's prevailing cost or something like that. That's not unreasonable if you're going to get large stacks of paper, but it is actually the taxpayer's responsibility to pay the salaries of people whose job is to archive and provide information. So instead of a service charge for the amount of time associated, if there are actual out of pocket type costs, you can have some reasonable, but I would keep it really low. Look, if the McCrory administration needs to spend $1 million more a year, hire additional people to comply with all the requests, and tell the voters the reason we're spending this money is because we're getting a lot of requests from the media, that's what they should do.
Rufus, this has got another interesting wrinkle, and as a former Attorney General, I'd be interested in your reaction on this. Civitas has asked for public email records and other records from Gene Nichols, who is a professor of the law school over in Chapel Hill. I'm not quite sure exactly what their motive is, but my understanding is it's primarily political. So the professors, a group of 30 professors over at Chapel Hill, said no, a professor's correspondence and records, that's private. Where do we start and where do we stop with public?
Well, he's a very controversial person, I think very smart. The key is whether he is acting in an official capacity. If he's doing something in an official capacity, yes, they're entitled to them. But it looks like my friends at Civitas, and I speak to them quite a bit, are off base on this one. And
well, what's the difference between that and asking for Governor McCrory's personal?
No, they're fishing.
Yeah, but what's the difference?
They don't get specific. They're asking for a whole bundle of stuff. What do you think?
Just to be clear, they don't have to be specific. Just as the reporters who are asking for material from McCrory's administration, they do not have to say what they're doing. And I don't believe those law professors said these were private records. They just didn't like the precedent. I don't think
they weren't challenging the law.
Yeah, I don't believe they're challenging the legality of the request.
Well, I think they were trying to say that it shouldn't be. Carolyn, is this a topic? I mean, the law on this is that government documents are the property of the peoples, and copies should be provided as promptly as possible at free or minimum cost. Do you think the legislature is going to take this subject back up and do anything about it?
Well, I wish they would. I agree with John and what these gentlemen have said. This belongs to the public. End of conversation. You don't discuss that anymore. But how are you going to get that information to the media or the requesting party? And if you have to hire 3 people to do it, then the public needs to know that the media is not going to pay for it. They're going to pay for it because this extra staff has to be hired. And, people are kind of upset with the media these days, and I, too, sometimes find them biased. But without them, how are we going to get this information? I think that's the bottom line. Bloggers just regurgitate what the media does.
All right. After these messages, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com.
One of my favorite parts of the show, we asked the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon.
State Senator Josh Stein recently announced his intention to run for Attorney General in 2016. He wants to go back to the Senate in 2014. There will be other Democrats in the not-too-distant future also make their plans known.
Rufus.
I've discovered that Lieutenant Dan Forrest is a great historic preservationist. He wants to help save all those buildings on Blunt Street, and I applaud him.
All right. Carolyn.
I just recently was reading information that says that 9,000 veterans in the state of North Carolina are homeless. We have an organization now in North Carolina that the Veterans Leadership Council that's rehabbing.
John, tell us something we don't know.
We've talked on the show before about the legal dispute about Alcoa's dams on the Yadkin River. That issue is about to come back with a vengeance. The McCrory administration is pursuing what the Perdue administration started. That's going to end up in federal court.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column, visit the website ncspin.com or catch NC Spin on Facebook. We hope you'll join us next week when we take on more issues of interest to people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.